What would you do if the people who betrayed you suddenly needed you the most? I never imagined my daughter-in-law and son would beg to move into my new penthouse. But the real reason why will shock you. Stay with me, because the twist at the end will change everything you think you know. 12 years ago, if you'd asked me to describe my life, I would have told you it was a whirlwind of laughter, love, and a little bit of chaos, the good kind. I was the proud matriarch of a bustling family, the glue that held everyone together. My house was the place where everyone gathered, where Sunday dinners were a sacred tradition, and where birthday cakes were always homemade, even if they leaned a little to the left. I loved every minute of it. My kitchen was always filled with the smells of something baking, and my living room echoed with the sound of my grandkids' giggles and the clinking of coffee cups as my children caught up on life. I was the one who remembered everyone's favorite pie, who sent cards for every occasion, and who always had a listening ear, no matter how small the problem. But then, everything changed. My son, my baby boy, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call me his best friend, got married. Now, don't get me wrong, I was thrilled for him. Every mother wants her children to find happiness, and I was no exception. I remember the first time he brought her home. She was beautiful, poised, and seemed to have it all together. Let's call her Miss Perfect. She had a smile that could light up a room and a way of making everyone feel just a little bit self-conscious. I tried my best to welcome her, to make her feel like part of the family. I complimented her on her dress, asked about her job, and even let her take over the kitchen for a night, something I rarely did. But looking back, I wonder if I tried too hard, or maybe not hard enough. It started with little things. A missed phone call here, a forgotten invitation there. At first, I brushed it off. Families get busy, right? Maybe they were just settling into married life. But then, the Sunday dinners that used to be a given became, maybe next week. The birthday parties I used to host were suddenly being held at their house, and I was told about them after the fact. Even my grandkids, who used to run into my arms, started calling me by my first name instead of Grandma. That one stung more than I care to admit. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? It's a special kind of heartbreak, let me tell you. I started to notice the way conversations would stop when I entered the room, or the way my daughter-in-law would give me that tight, lipped smile, the kind that says, "I'm tolerating you, but just barely." I replayed every interaction in my head, searching for what I'd done wrong. Did I forget to compliment her casserole? Did I wear the wrong shade of lipstick? Did I say something that could be twisted the wrong way? I even started second-guessing my own memories. Maybe I was too old-fashioned. Maybe I was too involved. Maybe I just didn't fit into their new, picture-perfect life. The worst part was the silence. The phone that used to ring off the hook was suddenly quiet. I'd pick it up just to make sure it was still working. I'd scroll through old photos on my phone, remembering the days when my family needed me, when I was the center of their world. I tried reaching out, sending texts and emails, but the responses were always short, polite, and distant. "We're busy. Maybe another time, Grandma." I started to feel like a ghost, haunting the edges of their lives, present but unseen. I confided in my friends, hoping for some comfort or advice. Some told me to give it time, that things would get better. Others said I should confront them, demand to know what I'd done to deserve this treatment. But I was afraid that if I pushed too hard I'd lose them completely. So I waited. I hoped. I baked their favorite cookies and dropped them off, only to find them untouched days later. I sent cards for every holiday, every birthday, every milestone, but rarely got a thank you in return. The holidays were the hardest. I'd decorate the house, set the table for a feast, and wait for the doorbell to ring. Sometimes they'd show up, but it was always rushed, always tense. My daughter-in-law would sit on her phone, my son would make excuses about work, and the grandkids would ask when they could go home. I'd smile and pretend everything was fine, but inside I was crumbling. I missed the days when we'd all laugh until our sides hurt, when my home was filled with warmth and love. I started to withdraw not just from them but from everyone. I stopped hosting dinners, stopped baking cakes, stopped reaching out. What was the point? I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do the wrong thing. I became a stranger in my own life, watching from the sidelines as my family moved on without me. I wondered if this was just how things were now, if I was destined to spend the rest of my days alone, with only memories for company. But here's the thing about heartbreak. It can either break you, or it can make you stronger. I didn't know it then, but this painful chapter was just the beginning of a new story. One where I'd have to find my own worth, my own happiness, and maybe, just maybe, a way back to the family I loved so much. But for now, I was the family outcast left out in the cold, wondering if I'd ever find my way back in. After months, no years, of feeling like a ghost in my own family, I'll admit, I spent a fair amount of time in my pajamas, binge-watching old sitcoms and eating ice cream straight from the carton. I mean, who wouldn't? When you've been the heart of your family for decades and suddenly find yourself on the outside looking in, it's like losing a part of your identity. I'd wander around my quiet house, dusting picture frames filled with happier times, and wonder if this was just how life was going to be from now on. But as the days dragged on, I realized something. I could either let this loneliness swallow me whole, or I could do something, anything, to pull myself out of the rut. And so, one rainy afternoon, I found myself rummaging through my old craft supplies, looking for a distraction. That's when I stumbled upon a box of candle-making kits I'd bought on a whim years ago. I remember thinking, well, at least if I burn the house down, no one will be here to judge me. So, I set up shop in my kitchen, melted some wax, and started experimenting with scents. Lavender for calm, vanilla for comfort, cinnamon for a little kick. The process was oddly soothing, measuring, mixing, pouring, waiting. For the first time in ages, my mind was quiet. No replaying old arguments, no wondering what I'd done wrong. Just me, the warm glow of the stove, and the promise of something new. At first, making candles was just a way to keep my hands busy and my mind off the silence. I gave a few to neighbors, who raved about how lovely they smelled. One even asked if she could buy a few for her book club. I laughed it off, but she insisted, pressing a $20 bill into my hand. "You've got a gift," she said. "You should sell these." I shrugged it off, but the idea stuck with me. What if I could turn this little hobby into something more? What if, instead of waiting for my family to come back to me, I built something of my own? So, I did what any woman with too much time and a stubborn streak would do. I got to work. I started small, selling candles at the local farmer's market. I'll never forget my first sale to a stranger. She picked up a jar, took a deep breath, and smiled. "This smells like my grandmother's kitchen," she said. I nearly cried right there on the spot. Word spread quickly. Soon I was getting custom orders, wedding favors, holiday gifts, even a big order for a local boutique. My kitchen turned into a candle factory, with jars and wicks and essential oils taking over every inch of counter space. I'd wake up early, pour candles all morning, and spend my afternoons packaging orders and answering emails. For the first time in years, I felt needed. I felt alive. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when I burned myself on hot wax, or spilled an entire batch of lavender oil on the floor. My first attempt at a website was a disaster. Let's just say I accidentally listed a candle for $1,000 instead of $10, and someone actually tried to buy it. But I learned as I went, watching YouTube tutorials and asking for help from anyone who would listen. I even joined a group of local women entrepreneurs who became my cheerleaders and, eventually, my friends. We'd meet for coffee, swap stories, and celebrate each other's wins. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. As my business grew, so did my confidence. I started experimenting with new scents, new packaging, even a line of candles inspired by my favorite memories: Sunday dinners, summer picnics, Christmas mornings. Each candle was a little piece of my heart, a way to share my story with the world. And people responded. Orders poured in from all over the country. I was featured in a local magazine, then a national one. I even got a call from a big department store, asking if I'd be interested in a partnership. Me, the woman who used to cry over missed phone calls, was now negotiating contracts and hiring help. With every milestone, I felt a little bit stronger, a little bit more like myself. I stopped waiting for my family to reach out. I stopped measuring my worth by their approval. I was building something of my own, something no one could take away from me. And as my business flourished, so did I. I started traveling to trade shows, meeting other makers, and dreaming bigger than I ever had before. I even treated myself to a new wardrobe. No more hiding in baggy sweaters and old jeans. I wanted the world to see the new me, confident, capable, and just a little bit sassy. Then, one day, I found myself sitting in a real estate office, signing papers for a luxurious penthouse downtown. I could hardly believe it. The view was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a balcony overlooking the city, a kitchen big enough to host the fanciest dinner parties. I walked through the empty rooms, imagining all the possibilities. This was my fresh start, my reward for all the years of hard work and heartache. Who says you can't reinvent yourself after 50? Not me. I'd gone from family outcast to successful businesswoman, and I did it all on my own terms. Take that, Miss Perfect! As I stood on my balcony that first night, watching the city lights twinkle below, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And while I still missed my family, I knew that I was more than the roles I'd played in their lives. I was strong, resilient, and ready for whatever came next. Little did I know, the next chapter was about to bring a twist I never saw coming. It was one of those evenings that felt almost too perfect to be real. I just poured myself a glass of champagne. Yes, real champagne. Not the cheap stuff I used to buy for special occasions, and was curled up on my plush new sofa, gazing out at the city lights from my penthouse. The world below sparkled, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I'd worked hard for this moment, and I was determined to savor every second. I even caught myself humming a little tune, something I hadn't done since the days when my house was filled with the noise and chaos of family life. It was peaceful, it was quiet, and it was all mine. Then, just as I was about to toast to my own resilience, there was a knock at the door. Not a polite, neighborly tap, but a firm, insistent knock that echoed through the apartment. I set my glass down, heart thumping a little faster. Who could it be at this hour? I wasn't expecting anyone, and the doorman usually called before sending guests up. For a split second, I wondered if I'd forgotten an appointment, or if maybe one of my new neighbors needed something. But as I walked to the door, I had a strange feeling in my gut, a mix of curiosity and dread, like the moment before the curtain rises at a play. I opened the door, and there they were. My son and his wife, standing side by side in the hallway, looking like they'd just lost their last game of Monopoly. My son's shoulders were slumped, his eyes tired, and my daughter-in-law, Miss Perfect herself, looked nothing like the polished, confident woman I remembered. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she clutched her purse like it was a life raft. For a moment, none of us said a word. We just stared at each other, the weight of 12 years of silence hanging in the air. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "Mother-in-law, we're moving in here because..." She trailed off, glancing at my son for support. He looked at me, then at his shoes, then back at me again. I could see the embarrassment, the uncertainty, and if I'm being honest, a little bit of hope in his eyes. I waited, arms crossed, trying to keep my face neutral. Inside, my mind was racing. Because what? Did their house flood? Did they lose their jobs? Or did they finally realize that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain after all? As it turned out, it was a little bit of everything. They'd hit a rough patch. No, scratch that, they'd hit a full-blown storm. My son's company had downsized, and he'd been let go with barely a severance package. My daughter-in-law's business had taken a nosedive after a string of bad reviews and a few unfortunate social media posts. Their beautiful suburban home, the one they'd been so proud to show off, was now on the market, and they were living out of suitcases, bouncing between friends' guest rooms and cheap hotels. To top it all off, their youngest had gotten sick, and the medical bills were piling up faster than they could pay them. They were exhausted, scared, and, though she'd never admit it, my daughter-in-law was desperate. I stood there, taking it all in, my heart doing somersaults. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. The woman who'd once made me feel so unwelcome in my own family was now standing on my doorstep, asking for help. Another part of me wanted to slam the door and let them figure it out on their own. But mostly, I just felt a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't the reunion I'd imagined. There were no apologies, no heartfelt confessions, just two people at the end of their rope, hoping I'd throw them a lifeline. I took a deep breath and stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. "Well," I said, trying to keep my tone light, "I hope you like city views and scented candles, because that's what I've got to offer." My son managed a weak smile, and my daughter-in-law let out a shaky breath, as if she'd been holding it for years. They stepped inside, looking around at the high ceilings and gleaming floors, the walls lined with photos of my new life. Trade shows, magazine features, and yes, a few snapshots of the family from happier times. We sat down in the living room, the three of us perched on the edge of the sofa like strangers at a bus stop. The silence was thick, but I could feel the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. My son looking to me for comfort, my daughter-in-law bristling with pride and fear. I poured them each a glass of water and waited for them to explain. They told me everything, their voices overlapping, sometimes arguing, sometimes apologizing. I listened, really listened, for the first time in years. I heard the fear in my son's voice, the exhaustion in my daughter-in-law's, and beneath it all, a longing for something they'd lost, maybe not just their home, but their sense of family. As the night wore on, the conversation softened. My daughter-in-law, who'd always been so guarded, finally let her walls down. She admitted she'd felt threatened by me, that she'd been trying so hard to prove herself that she'd pushed me away. My son apologized for not standing up for me, for letting the distance grow. There were tears, real, messy, cathartic tears, and for the first time in a long time I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was our chance to start over, to rebuild what we'd lost. By the time the city lights had faded into dawn, we'd made a plan. They would stay with me until they got back on their feet. We'd set boundaries, communicate honestly, and most importantly, try to forgive each other for the past. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd dreamed of, but it was real, and it was ours. As I watched them settle into the guest room, I realized that sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even if it's not what you expected. And as I crawled into bed, exhausted but strangely at peace, I knew that the next chapter of our story was just beginning. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be sharing my penthouse with my son and daughter-in-law, the very people who once made me feel like a stranger in my own family, I would have laughed you right out of my candle-scented living room. But there we were, three unlikely roommates, tiptoeing around each other at first like cats in a room full of rocking chairs. I'll admit, the first few days were awkward. My daughter-in-law, Miss Perfect, tried to keep up appearances, but the cracks were showing. She'd offer to help in the kitchen, then fumble with the fancy appliances. My son, always the peacemaker, would try to fill the silence with small talk, but we all knew there were bigger things left unsaid. And me, well, I was caught somewhere between wanting to gloat and wanting to hug them both. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy a little poetic justice. After all those years of being left out, here they were needing me. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected happened. The walls we'd built, out of pride, out of hurt, out of misunderstanding, started to crumble. It began with small things. My daughter-in-law, who used to roll her eyes at my old-fashioned ways, started asking for my advice. She wanted to know how I made my famous chicken pot pie, how I kept my plants alive, how I managed to run a business from home without losing my mind. At first I was cautious, afraid she was just being polite. But then I saw the genuine curiosity in her eyes, the way she scribbled notes in her little planner, the way she smiled when something I said actually worked. My son, too, seemed to relax. He'd come home from job interviews and plop down at the kitchen island, telling me about his day, asking for my opinion, just like he used to when he was a boy. We started having real conversations again, not just about bills and logistics, but about dreams, regrets, and the things that really matter. One night, after a particularly long day, we found ourselves sitting around the kitchen island, sharing a bottle of wine. The city lights twinkled outside, and for a moment it felt like old times, before the misunderstandings, before the distance. My daughter-in-law looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and said, "I'm sorry. I never realized how much you did for this family. I was so busy trying to prove myself that I pushed you away. I see that now." My son reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "We took you for granted, Mom. I'm sorry for that." The words hung in the air, heavy and healing all at once. I felt a lump in my throat, but I managed to smile. "Well," I said, "I suppose we all have things we wish we'd done differently. But we're here now. That's what matters." We laughed about the old days, about burnt casseroles and disastrous family vacations, about the time my son tried to build a treehouse and ended up stuck in the branches for hours. We cried a little too, mourning the years we'd lost to pride and stubbornness. But mostly, we forgave each other. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. There were still moments of tension, still old wounds that ached when poked, but we were trying, all of us, and that made all the difference. As the weeks went by, our little trio found a new rhythm. My daughter-in-law started helping me with the candle business, bringing fresh ideas and a knack for marketing that I never had. My son landed a new job, one that made him happier than I'd seen in years. We celebrated small victories, new orders, job offers, even just making it through a day without stepping on each other's toes. The penthouse, once a symbol of my independence, became a home again, a place filled with laughter, with the smell of baking bread and melting wax, with the sound of family. And here's the twist: the sweetest revenge wasn't slamming the door in their faces or making them grovel. It wasn't about proving I was right or rubbing their noses in their mistakes. The real victory was in letting go of the hurt, in choosing grace over grudges, in opening my heart when it would have been easier to close it. I realized that living well isn't just about fancy apartments or successful businesses. It's about loving fiercely, forgiving freely, and finding joy in second chances. One afternoon, as we sat together on the balcony, my daughter-in-law turned to me and said, "You know, I used to think you were trying to control everything, but now I see you were just trying to hold us together." I laughed a real belly-deep laugh. "Well, I do like things a certain way," I teased, "but I promise, I'm not the wicked mother-in-law you thought I was." She grinned, and for the first time, I saw not a rival but a friend. We still had our moments, of course. No family is perfect. But we learned to talk things out, to apologize when we messed up, to give each other the benefit of the doubt. And as I watched my son and his wife rebuild their lives, I felt a quiet pride, not just in what I'd accomplished, but in the family we were becoming. We were stronger, wiser, and, yes, a little bit scarred. But we were together, and that was enough. So if you're reading this and wondering if it's ever too late for a fresh start, let me be the first to tell you it's not. Whether you're mending fences with family, starting a new business, or just learning to love yourself again, there's always hope. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living your life with joy and grace. And maybe, just maybe, letting a little bit of sweet karma do the rest. So ladies, have you ever been the black sheep or the comeback queen? Drop your story in the comments. And if you love a good tale of family drama, resilience, and a dash of humor, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, I've got plenty more stories where this came from.